You are not lazy. You are not without ambition. You are not incapable of the life you keep imagining at 2 in the morning, then talking yourself out of by 9. What you are is protected by a mechanism so old it predates language, so quiet it never announces itself, so effective that it will let you die with your best work still unstarted and call that a peaceful death. You will not see it in a mirror. You will not find it in a diagnosis. You will feel it first. A small tightening before the risky email. A strange relief when the audition gets killed. A comfort in staying exactly the size you already are. You will sense it before you can name it. Baltasar Gracián, a Jesuit priest in secret 400 years ago, gave this mechanism a name. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly how the instinct that once kept your ancestors in dangerous courts has been quietly repurposed to keep you small in a world that no longer requires it, and precisely what it will cost you if you let it keep running unexamined. The first law, the invisibility tax. Hiding is not humility. Say that again in your head, slower. Hiding is not humility. The popular version of this idea tells you that staying quiet, that the truly talented don't need to announce themselves, that the work will simply speak for itself if you wait long enough in the corner. This is comforting. It is also almost entirely false. Talent that is never displayed does not accumulate value like a savings account. It decays like fruit left in a drawer. Gracián understood this with unusual precision for a man bound by vows of obedience and silence. In his C447 handbook, later translated English as The Art of Worldly Wisdom, he wrote extensively about the discipline of revealing yourself in careful, calculated doses, warning that a person who is never seen is eventually treated as though they do not exist. Not humble, invisible. There is a difference, and the difference is the entire trap. Consider Gracián's own life. He was a member of the Society of Jesus, bound by an internal rule that forbade members from publishing without direct approval from their superiors. He wanted to write. He believed he had something worth saying about power, cunning, and self-command in a treacherous century. So he did what the instinct for safety always suggests. He hid. He published his major works under the anagram of his own name, Lorenzo Gracián, submitting them without his order's permission, terrified of exposure, publishing anyway because the alternative was worse. When his superiors discovered the deception, he was punished, reassigned to a remote post, and forbidden from writing further. He kept writing. Here is the pivot you need to sit with. The instinct to hide did not protect Gracián's career. It delayed it, distorted it, made it harder and more dangerous than it needed to be. The same instinct is sitting in your chest right now, telling you that staying unseen is the safe move. It is not the safe move. It is the slow one. And slow in a single lifetime is its own kind of danger. The second law. The safety debt. Safety is not free. You have been told since childhood in 100 small phrases that costs nothing. Better safe than sorry. Look before you leap. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Every one of these phrases treats safety as a default state, a resting position with no price tag. This is the shallow version, and it survives because it feels true in the moment you say no to something risky. What it hides is the compounding interest. Roy Baumeister's research on self-regulation, conducted with Mark Muraven in the late 1990s, demonstrated something uncomfortable about willpower. It is not infinite. Every act of restraint draws from a finite pool, and every time you choose the safe, small, contained option instead of the ambitious one, you are not simply avoiding a cost. You are deferring it with interest into a future self who will have less capacity to pay it. Nassim Taleb, decades later, gave this deferral a sharper name, his 2012 book Antifragile, describing how systems that avoid all volatility do not become stable. They become brittle, unprepared for the shock that eventually arrives regardless of how carefully you tried to avoid it. Consider Vincent van Gogh. Before he ever picked up a brush with any seriousness, he spent nearly a decade choosing safety. He worked as an art dealer's assistant in a respectable firm. He trained as a preacher, going so far as to give away his own clothing and bedding to the poor miners he served in Belgium, trying to embody a safe, sanctioned form of purpose that his church superiors eventually found excessive and revoked. He tried teaching. He tried bookselling. Each attempt was a version of the safe path, the socially approved container, and each one ended not in disaster, but in a quiet, grinding failure to feel alive. He did not begin serious painting until he was 27 years old, with roughly a decade left to live. The debt he had accumulated by choosing safety again and again was not measured in money. It was measured in years he did not get back. This is the pivot. Every safe choice today is a loan against a future self who has fewer years left to spend on the ambitious version of your life. The interest rate is your own mortality, and it does not negotiate. The third law, the mediocrity shield. Fitting in is not belonging. It is camouflage that has learned to feel like warmth. The shallow version of this idea says don't stand out, don't invite envy, don't give anyone a reason to target you. There is a grain of ancient truth buried in that advice. In small, dangerous, zero-sum courts, standing out really could get you killed. And Gracián, who lived and worked inside exactly that kind of environment in 17th century Spain, knew it intimately. But the mechanism that protected people in 17th century Spanish court politics is now running unmodified in your brain while you sit in a job that cannot execute you, in a country that will not banish you, surrounded by people who are mostly too busy with their own survival to plot against yours. Solomon Asch's conformity experiments in 1951 demonstrated exactly how deep this wiring runs. Subjects were to judge the length of lines in a room full of actors giving deliberately wrong answers. A significant portion of real subjects abandoned the evidence of their own eyes and gave the wrong answer too, simply to avoid the discomfort of standing apart from the group. Not because they were stupid, because standing apart, to a primate brain built for tribal survival, registers as danger regardless of the actual stakes. Nikola Tesla lived this law from the inside. When he first arrived in America and went to work for Thomas Edison, he operated for years inside the shield of the safe employee. The brilliant subordinate promised a substantial bonus for improving Edison's direct current generators. A bonus Edison later dismissed as a joke told to a European who didn't understand American humor. Tesla stayed inside that shield far longer than his talent justified, absorbing the insult, continuing the safe, contained role of employee rather than rival, until the gap between what he was capable of and what he was permitted to be became unbearable enough to force the break. He left. He nearly starved digging ditches for $2 a day before anyone would back his own ideas. The shield had kept him safe. It had also kept him small for years. He never recovered. Quick pause here, because this is the point in the video where most people's comfort peaks, and where the polished version of this material stops being useful. Everything you've heard so far is the sanitized cut. The deeper, unfiltered breakdown of how to actually dismantle this shield in your own life, the version I don't put on YouTube, on Patreon, where members get the uncensored breakdowns a week. If any of this is landing, that's where the rib can use. Alright, back to the video. The third law leaves you with this. The shield that protects you from being targeted is the same shield that guarantees you will never be seen for what you're actually capable of. You cannot have both. You cannot be perfectly safe and fully known. Choose which fear you'd rather live inside. The fourth law. The permission trap. Waiting for permission is not patience. It is outsourcing your own ambition to strangers who did not ask for the job and will not do it well. The shallow version insists you need credentials, need authority, need someone official to tell you that you are allowed to begin. Albert Bandura's research on self-efficacy, formalized in his influential 1977 paper, found that a person's belief in their own capability to execute a course of action was a stronger predictor of whether they actually attempted it than their objective skill level. In plain terms, permission is mostly a story you tell yourself, and the story is more powerful than the facts. Rosa Parks is remembered, in the flattened of history, as a tired woman who simply snapped one evening on a Montgomery bus in 1955. The concrete reality is colder and more instructive. Parks had been the secretary of the local NAACP chapter for decade. She had attended training at the Highlander Folk School, specifically on strategies of nonviolent resistance. She had, months before the famous arrest, already turned down the same section of the same bus system once before, refusing to move and been forced off. The refusal that made history was not a spontaneous break from a survival instinct. It was the release of an ambition that had been quietly building permission for itself, in private, before the world ever saw it. She did not wait for someone to hand her authority. She built in the dark and then acted the moment the door opened. This is the pivot. The permission you are waiting for does not exist as an external object. It is not sitting in an inbox, in a promotion, in someone else's approval. It is a threshold you cross privately, long before anyone else notices you've crossed it. And the trap is believing you need to be granted something that was never anyone else's to give. The fifth law, the vanishing point. Ambition does not die in one dramatic moment. There is no funeral for it, no clear date you could mark on a calendar. It dies in 1,000 small postponements, each one so minor it never feels like a decision at all. The shallow version of this problem tells you there's always tomorrow. That ambition is a fixed resource you can return to whenever you're ready, like a book left open on a table. Angela Duckworth's research on grit, published in her 2016 book of the same name, found that sustained achievement correlated less with raw talent than with a consistency of interest and effort maintained over years, not days. The critical finding underneath that headline is quieter and more brutal. Grit is not a trait you either have or don't. It is a compounding pattern, built or eroded by thousands of tiny choices, and every single postponement erodes it slightly, the way water erodes stone. Until one day the shape of the thing is simply gone, and you cannot point to the moment it happened. Consider Elizabeth Tudor. Before she was Elizabeth I of England, for years under the reign of her half-sister Mary, she lived under active suspicion of treason. Implicated in rebellions she may or may not have supported, imprisoned briefly in the Tower of London, walking through the same gate condemned prisoners walked on their way to execution. Her survival strategy during those years was total, disciplined restraint. She wrote careful, deferential letters. She professed loyalty. She made herself small, unremarkable, unthreatening for years, because the alternative, This was rational. This was necessary. But notice what happened the moment Mary died and the crown passed to her. Elizabeth did not remain the cautious, deferential figure she had spent years performing. The ambition had not vanished under the years of enforced smallness. It had been preserved, banked, waiting for the exact moment survival no longer required its suppression. And then it moved decisively, reshaping an entire nation for the next 4 decades. The lesson is not that caution is always the vanishing point. The lesson is that Elizabeth knew, with total clarity, the difference between strategic dormancy and actual surrender. Most people performing the same caution today have which one they're doing. Here is where this stops being about historical case studies, because none of what you've just heard is actually the point. The point is colder than 5 laws and 5 names. The point is this. Nobody is going to stop you from shrinking. There is no external enforcement mechanism for a wasted life. No court will convict you of playing it too safe. No employer will fire you for ambition you quietly let die. No friend, no family member. No algorithm is going to interrupt your Tuesday and tell you that the version of you capable of the bigger life is currently being starved to death by a threat detection system for a world of literal physical danger that no longer exists for most of the people watching this. The 5 laws you just heard are not a checklist. They are a diagnostic. Somewhere in the invisibility tax, the safety debt, the mediocrity shield, the permission trap, or the vanishing point, you already know which one has you. You knew before I finished describing it. That recognition, the small uncomfortable flicker you felt somewhere in the last 20 minutes, is the only warning you are going to get. There will not be a second one. So ask yourself the question this video opened with, and this time, answer it honestly. What are you protecting by staying exactly this size? What